I was told I need to be an empathetic leader, and therefore I'm going to be mindful and I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to be focused and pay attention. It's going to show as that, right? Because how you think is how you feel is how you act, and it comes out, right? Evolution has wired us to be able to detect authenticity, right?
What's your experience been like, and what's your advice to, not only the young females out there, but just to young people and, young immigrants out there that see that as a barrier or challenge? All right, good morning, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the RK Leadership Podcast, where we empower tomorrow's leaders through the inspiring stories and knowledge and sharing of experiences. I'm your host, Rob Cameronpour, and my special guest today is Amna Tariq-Buchholz, and she is the VP of Technology Advisory of Jarvis Consulting Group. And Amna spent she's had various executive roles in the banking industry prior to that. So before letting her introduce herself a little further, I'd like to thank you for being with me today and joining the RK Leadership Podcast. Again, thank you and welcome to today's podcast.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me over.
No problem. So why don't we start off by Amna sharing your story. And what part of your story would you think resonates the most with people?
For sure. I mean, my story is like many people that you would come across over here. I'm an immigrant to Canada, right? So I was born in Pakistan. I grew up in Dubai, and then I came to Canada to study engineering, and I fell in love with the country and made it my home. So professionally, I've been in financial services for 16 plus years. I've done the small shops, I've done the large shops as well. And it's been an interesting journey for me because I am first generation corporate in my family. And
Nice.
So, there was a lot of learning for me to do, a lot of unlearning, a lot of relearning, and I am super grateful for all the mentors and allies and sponsors I came across throughout my career who've helped guide me. And so right now I've made a career pivot after 16 years in financial services to move to technology consulting. I'm at Jarvis Consulting Group, and this is really for me to go back to my roots, which is problem solving in
Nice.
a variety of contexts. And for me, the learning part, which I'm always crave in roles, is technology and understanding how to use technology to solve business problems. Because like it or not, most problems are going to be solved with some form of technology.
That's right.
So that's a little bit about my story.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. Now, you and I had a conversation prior to this, and you mentioned something about somebody once told you that math is a man's subject. And I wanted to get your perspective on how did that make you feel and what did you do about it?
So yes, that did happen. That happened actually in 11th grade. That was in 11th grade. I still remember that moment. It had a tough, I think it was a test or an exam, and I was talking about it, and then I was told math is a man's subject, right? So I mean, how I felt in that moment was actually I felt very revved on, like game on, let's do this, right? And I think some context over here. I've always, like how I've been wired is to go after, the most complex, if you will, right? Like through a challenge, I'm always up for it.
That's right.
And, like in school, I would be going after the projects that were the ones that nobody wanted, or like in spelling bees, I would be happy if I got a tough word to spell out. It's just, a little bit of who I am. And so I loved the sciences. I loved math, chemistry, physics, all of those subjects. So I went ahead and, took that forward as my academic pursuit. I went ahead and did my undergraduate in chemical engineering. I did my grad studies as well.
Nice.
I would have done my PhD if I hadn't found a job as well. But I was thinking about this a little bit. The flip side, something else happened recently, right? And I had a bit of a different reaction to it.
What was that?
So I was at a work, it was a professional event. And so it was a town hall, and everybody's sitting around their tables, and there's different agendas that you cycle through. And there was a segment where you're doing brainstorming in your table. You brainstorm, you come up with ideas, and then you write them down, and then you present them out. And I was sitting on a table of, I would say, 4 or 5 men, and I was the only female.
Oh.
And so everything was going great until it came time to figure out who's going to scribe. And this has happened to me previously in my career. And, some of the men looked at me and said, and I quote, "You look like someone who would have good handwriting. Can you scribe for us?" Right? And in that moment, I didn't get a chance to react because sitting right beside me was actually my boss. And without even a split second, like, he jumped in and redirected it and passed the scribing to someone else. And I haven't had a chance actually to share this with my boss. He's probably going to find out once he hears the podcast.
Yeah, nice.
But you know what, like, that moment, what it taught me is that even for someone like myself, I pride myself for being resilient. Like, it mattered so much to have an ally present, right? To have an ally present
Absolutely.
who, had my back, made me feel included. And it's so important to be able to have people like that in environments that are able to create a culture where you do feel included, no matter which path you come from.
Absolutely. And that's super important because, again, as a leader, it's kind of your job to protect your people.
Right on.
And that's the great way to protecting somebody. And that is, to me, inclusion, because, again, I've heard this multiple times, by the way, by various females, that they've been picked on to do the scribing because they say, oh, the people say you've got good handwriting.
Right on.
And
Yeah.
you can't be saying that kind of stuff. And again, that's the culture we need to change amongst various organizations as well.
Agreed. And you know what? Like, it wasn't the first time that has happened to me. It's happened to me in the past as well.
Yeah.
And a junior Amna, so when I was a lot junior, when it happened to me, that resiliency, I was like, game on. I'll write the best minutes you've ever seen in your life, right?
Yeah.
But then a part of me just didn't want to just sit with it.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I did reach out to the gentleman who, we were all peers, and I was the person who had to do the scribing. I did have a conversation with him. And when I learned in that moment that oftentimes it's just from a lack of awareness.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
Look of how these actions can be perceived.
Yep.
And just having that conversation with him led to him realizing his part of this whole puzzle. And ever since then, he was different.
Good.
And so I think, like, if all of us could, there is going to be stuff in the environment that is not what we're comfortable with. But if all of us could take our action either proactively or through allyship, I think we all can play a big role in creating the changes we want to see.
100%. And it's also, these kind of conversations that help educate the audience and the people, watching this kind of stuff to learn that, hey, this type of behavior is not okay. And it might have been okay in the past and you might have gotten away with it, but things like that have to stop. And, you have to be self-aware of the questions or the comments that are coming out of your mouth as well.
100%, right? You have to understand, like, what the impact
That's
of those
right.
could be.
That's right.
Like, I've done this. How does it make other people feel?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, Amna, you talked about being a chemical engineer. How did you make that transition to the finance industry, and what made you kind of go towards finance?
I feel like you've spoken to my parents. They
My
still
life.
ask me that question, like 5 years of engineering. Um, you know what? Like, so take it directionally. I read somewhere 75% of engineers actually leave engineering, right? And so one of the things that engineers are trained to do is solve problems.
That's right.
And they solve problems like in a very unique way. And you should be familiar with that, right?
Yes.
Like the analytical, structured, methodical, logical, sequential. And that's valued. And problems are everywhere, so engineers are valued everywhere. Now, how I got into financial services was interesting, right? So one of the values that my parents always raised me with is surround yourself with good people.
Yes.
Always surround yourself like with good friends, good people, and watch yourself become better. And so it's interesting how that played out when it was, I'd finished my graduate studies and it was like time to find a job, and all these companies come on campus. This was McGill University. And, um, you know, at that time, the company that I ended up going with, Capital One, nobody had ever heard of them in Quebec, right? They didn't have a presence, but they sent the coolest crew over, right? Like smart, passionate, driven. And for that time, it was a very diverse group. And to me, like when I ranked and stacked my experience with that group versus the top tier consulting firms and the engineering firms, I could see myself belonging in that space, and that's what led me into financial services. And that's what took me from Capital One to TD, and now at Jarvis, which is all
Nice.
about chasing those great, amazing people, right? That care about what you do and how you do it and who you do it with. And so that's the story. That's the backstory behind coming
Awesome.
into financial services.
Oh, that's great. And I think, you nailed it. A lot of people, including myself, that went into the engineering world, I left a lot sooner than you
Oh,
did.
did you?
But I still stayed within the industry, but
Yeah.
I couldn't do engineering because, I like the dealing with people and working with people
Right
rather
on.
than sitting behind a desk and designing. So, kudos to you on that.
Right on. Right on.
Now, you've been at an executive level in multiple organizations, and I want you to share your experience as a female in terms of climbing that corporate ladder. What's your experience been like, and what's your advice to not only the young females out there, but just to young people and young immigrants out there that see that as a barrier or challenge?
Right. So I've been very fortunate and privileged, right? I think coming to Canada as an immigrant, first generation corporate, there was a lot of barriers that I faced. And, when I reflect back, a lot of them were internal, self imposed barriers, right? And so I always wanted to do something like that leaves a dent wherever I go. Like there's something that's become better because I've been there. And to me, like the bigger the impact is, that naturally gets me very excited. And so, as you grow in your career and as you get to leadership positions, the impact just gets bigger. So that was my motivating force. But being an immigrant, being first generation corporate, I had no idea how to do it, right?
Yeah.
And so to me, the guiding principles I started my career with, that last to this day, of how I operate, is the starting point of my story, which is like, do great work, and, try to do that extra bit, try to go above and beyond. To me, I'm always like curious and drawn to learning new things, right?
Yes.
Because the one thing is, I learned at a young age is like no one knows everything and no one knows how to do everything. Like, so keep learning.
That's right.
Having fun is so important for me. If I'm not having fun, then the work is going to show too. So
Yes.
those three elements, and I think arguably the last one was probably the one that really helped carry me further, which is helping others. And I think, Rob, I think that's a function of my cultural upbringing, my background, being a Pakistani. In that culture, there's that sense of that collective we over me,
That's
right?
right.
And so that's how I've operated my entire career. And And, over time, I was very fortunate to meet with people that wanted to mentor me, allies, sponsors. In fact, like, there's so many pivots in my career. Had that person not been there, I wouldn't have gone down that branch. I still remember I was a manager, right? Having in a big five bank, having a career conversation with a business leader and talking about my short, medium, long term, and I might have shared the story with you previously. And I still remember to this day, it's been almost 10 years, that the long term 5-year outlook I had for myself, my mentor turned around and said, well, why don't you do it in the next 5 weeks, right? And that was like that light bulb moment for me. Well, hold on a sec. I don't have to check all these boxes. Well, that's very, so anyways, having those mentors and sponsors show me the way, clear the way, really helped me progress forward in my career, and get to, where I am today. And I think that, I think the last part of your question is like, what would I say to, the next generation of leaders that are coming up, like the young women, the immigrants, the racialized women. What I would say is that, no one cares about your career more than you would, right? So that's the starting point. So own your career. And what that means and how you do it is like spend the time to understand who you are, what drives you, what motivates you, and be able to articulate that, right?
Yes.
Because a lot of times I find, even myself, floating around, regurgitating what society expects us to say versus like, this is my core, this is who I am, this is what I want to do. So spend some time to understand who you are, how you're wired, what kinds of work do you enjoy, and then find the people, find that tribe, surround yourself with the people that would lift you up, right? Seek those people that inspire you, that you would want to be like them one day, and meet with them. Oftentimes, like, oftentimes not, like, most people would want to connect, would want to help, would want to mentor, right? And they're hungry to share what they've learned to the next generation. So don't be afraid to ask, and then enjoy the ride. Like, the last piece I would say is, career is a marathon. It's not a sprint, right?
Absolutely.
It's not a sprint, and enjoy every phase of your journey, your evolution, your growth.
Absolutely. I think, one of the things that you definitely have is that resiliency. And you talked about, everything is internal. And I think people start playing that victim card, and that's what's going to sabotage your whole career and kind of hold you back from being able to climb or go wherever you want to go. So, saying that, how were you able to change your mindset? What did you do to again empower yourself and change your mindset to have that capability to say, hey, I can do this?
Yeah, you know what? Like, there's multiple points that I can point to, because it wasn't like, oh, I woke up one day and I'm like, I'm going to change my
That's right,
mindset.
yeah.
So I'm going to go back to a story, and I don't think I've shared this one with you. A little young Amna, really young, I'm thinking grade 5, grade 6, my father knows this story. I was struggling at school. I was really bad. I was going to flunk math, right? And I wanted to drop math, and I wanted to go in an alternate career path. I wanted to become a pilot. It was very interesting space I was in. And I remember having this conversation with my father where it was back to school. You go out, you buy stationery bags and whatnot. So I'm going stationery shopping with my father, and he's having a conversation with me about me and this other person in my class. We're going to call her Sana. She used to always come first, right, in class, always first. I was like sitting at the bottom of the pack at that point. And I remember he said this thing. He asked me these questions. He's one of the smartest men I know, right? He asked me, like, how many eyes does Sana have? I was like, well, 2. How many do you have? I'm like, 2. And then he went all around, like, how many ears, how many nose, how many mouth. It's like, Sana, and you are exactly the same. So what is it about Sana that she gets the first rank in and you're here? And so grade 5, grade 6, Amna, like, that's like when, when you receive a message and it clicks. For me, I was like, oh, it's all in me. It's like, it's in my control. If someone else can do it, so should I.
That's right.
Right? So that was a pivotal point. And then, my gosh, like academically, things completely flipped the script. So I'll give full kudos to my father for that. And I think professionally in my career, there were many times where, I would hesitate to take on roles, or it would be so out of my comfort zone. And I was like, oh, I need to tap out, right? Like this is just getting way too much. And again, it goes back to the tribe. I've been very fortunate to have mentors that have stayed around me and been there to catch me in those moments where I'm like on the floor, right? And like to dust me off and like get on with it. You got this, right? So the other lesson I learned over time is like, it's not about perfection, it's about progress.
Yes.
That was huge for me, right?
100%.
As someone who's like a high achiever and wants to like, I realized that I was aiming in the wrong direction and putting a lot of pressure on myself. And so another lesson I learned from someone much wiser than me was that they shared that, the higher you go, it's not the pressure that gets to you, because the pressure, is the same for everyone.
That's right.
They said it's how you internalize it, right? And so then that's when you keep hearing those concepts that you reflect on it. You're like, well, hold on a sec. There's like a engineer. There's an equation over here, right? Like the equation is, and so I can say this, like from one nerd to another, how you think, right? Becomes how you feel.
That's right.
How you feel becomes how you act, and how you act becomes your reality.
Absolutely.
Right? So you go back to like, how much power do you have? Because you can control how you think. Right? And oftentimes people don't realize how simple it is.
It is. And that's an excellent equation, by the way. And it works really well and it's that simple.
Yeah.
And you need to sometimes simplify things in life.
Right on.
So that's a great way to put it.
Of course. Yeah. Now I will add, oftentimes it's hard to be able to manage thinking if it's been so deep-rooted. You mentioned the victim card, right? Like sometimes thought patterns get deep-rooted in our psyche based on how we're raised, how we're socialized, the life experiences we have. The reality is the brain is a beautiful thing. It's very plastic, right? It's a muscle, and how you exercise it is where it gets strong.
That's right.
So learning how to be mindful of the thoughts and the stories that you're telling yourself, right? And being able to redirect and reframe what's happening around you in the way you want to experience life becomes the key.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah. I totally agree with that. Now, let's go back throughout your experience in your career, in various organizations that you've been with up until today, okay? What are some of the major gaps you see in leadership, and how do we fix it?
How much time do we have? I think, so I'm going to pick two because these ones hit home for me. I think one of them is no surprise, diversity, right? Like diversity, and what I mean by diversity is at the leadership levels, right? And just before this podcast, you and I were having a chat about a peer I've connected with recently. Her name is Amna Tariq-Buchholz, and I hope she's on your podcast someday. So her story is she rose up the ranks as an executive and then created a social enterprise based on her experiences called Fix the Broken Rung, which is focused on empowering racialized immigrant women. And she shared this stat with me, which I found fascinating, and that I think you will find fascinating too, given all the great work that you're doing on the engineering side.
Thank you.
There was a report, an employment report that came out in 2019, and it shared this stat that in Toronto, 1% of the executives are racialized immigrant women, and the workforce has 17% of them, right?
Wow.
So, and that bleeds over to other diversity groups as well. So then, then in your mind you go, well, this is not a pipeline issue per se, right?
That's
like
right.
You have, highly driven, highly skilled workforce that is potentially underleveraged and underutilized, which is a problem. As a business owner, you would appreciate, well, I want to get the maximum out of, the people. And so we talked a lot about, like, what are some of the things that can be done to change the tide when it comes to diversity and the role that leaders play in it. And, there's a bunch of things from having metrics and targets, right? Like you can measure what you can manage what you can measure,
Yep.
right? And then having incentive systems to actually move that dial. One thing that Amal's really passionate about is training and support, right? Providing training and support
Yes.
for the talent tailored to their unique needs, right? There's nuances to groups that come from multicultural background, and it's like for leadership to understand what those could mean and be able to support them in their needs. There's policies, right? Hiring, making sure you've got diversity on both sides of the hiring table, like from your candidates to your. But the last one that we talked about, which I found fascinating, which I hope it's interesting to dig in with, was it's not a pipeline issue, right? It's the engagement of that talent.
Yes.
Right? The engagement of the talent, and how you engage is through the cultures that you create. And if you think about it, cultures are created by leaders.
Absolutely.
Right? And so if you think about leaders and how they engage with the talent and the different ways how they connect and create relationships, growing up in corporate Canada, there's a lot of camaraderie around the golf courses or talking about the hockey game or, going out for bike rides or beer after work. And, for someone like myself who grew up outside of Canada, some of these topics, they don't relate to me, right?
That's right.
So I found myself in these interesting positions where either I forced myself to learn about hockey and then, faux pas my way into a conversation, which was genuinely very inauthentic for myself, right?
Yes.
Or I just elect myself out, right? Or being a primary caregiver, don't have the opportunities to be able to go out on those bike rides or, for religious reasons, can't go have beer after dinner, after work. And so, I think that there is a responsibility that leadership has to empathize and understand
100%.
the entire workforce. And how do you create a culture which is inclusive for all, right? And how do you engage everybody, which gives everybody a fair chance to rise up then? So that, I would say, is the first piece that I see. And that kind of ties in to the second gap that I'm seeing, and that's empathy. Right? Like if you think about the last couple of years we've gone through, Rob, COVID, right? The tragedies that came out of it, work from home, people for multiple years, some of them had to work from home. Then, coming back into the workforce, readapting to what that means, inflation, interest rates going high. Not everybody, and majority of the people don't make a lot to make their ends meet. And now there's trade-offs happening.
That's right.
Off like mortgage, right? Put food on the table, what's left, right? And then all the conflicts that are happening in the world.
Yes.
So it's a tough time.
It is.
It's a tough time. And we have to understand that the people, me and you, that show up at work and the person that's home, we're the same people.
Yes.
We're all intertwined. And if one hurts, so does the other. And so to take it back to empathy, right? Like empathy is needed at a leadership level to understand the workforce and to create the culture and to create the environment that is supportive and inclusive for all. And leadership better do that in a hurry, because I read this research, Deloitte, it came out in Deloitte, and they forecasting by 2025 to 2030, 75% of the workforce will be millennials.
Yes.
Being a millennial myself, right? What I would say to that is we're driven by very different motivators, right? Like financial isn't the sole reason.
Absolutely.
There's the purpose. There's the flexibility. There's the make me a part of something bigger, not a cog in the big machine. And I think the leaders that understand how to bring empathy as a strength are the ones that are going to win. Right?
100%. I couldn't agree with you more. So I have two kind of questions that I want to ask with respect to what you've said. So first, let's start with the DEI part.
Right on.
Okay. Now, the issue I have, and I'm going to challenge you with this, is because you brought it up, is you talked about the matrices and the policies and everything that needs to be put in place. What I've seen throughout some organizations is that becomes a ticky box, and it's just done for perception. So people say, hey, you know, we've got diversity. How do we get around that? How do we make it that it's, again, authentic? Because again, if the board gives you a mandate to say you got to have like 4 females, 3 males, whatever that ratio is, are we really doing it authentically, or are we just filling seats with, you know, what needs to be filled? Are we bringing the best people in?
Right on. And that's a really good question, right? And you see all kinds of practices happening to try to win the DEI race. It's almost become a race,
That's
right? Like, how do I showcase? And I think I'm going to simplify this a little bit.
Good.
Right? To me, the organizations that get it right have the right intent.
Yes.
It starts with intent.
Intent.
Intent at the top of the house.
Yes.
Right? Why are we doing this?
Yep.
What is the reason for it? Right? And it's okay to say diversity actually makes good business sense, right? That argument is so, you know, you can't refute that. But I think the other side of it is like the social aspect of it, right? How do we lift everybody, right? How do we create an environment where everybody feels welcome, included, and can bring their best selves forward? That creates that cycle of a business to be able to attract the best of the best.
Absolutely.
Because I will tell you, it doesn't take a lot to know when it's a ticky box exercise versus like we truly genuinely believe in it, right? And I've experienced different ways how organizations have tried to do it. So I would say the things that I've seen that have worked is when you've got intent aligned to the right North Star at the top of the house, right? There was a fundamental conviction at the top of the house of why this is the right thing to do, which then cascades to the levels below. And if that isn't right, then, you know, the ticky box exercise becomes what everybody marches towards.
Exactly.
Right? And so the second piece I would say is there's a lot of work that happens of driving awareness in organizations. There's a lot of trainings that happen. There's a lot of like policies that get changed and whatnot. But I think that they focus a lot on the what. This is what we should be doing. This is what we should be doing. But I feel that what gets missing is the how. Helping people to understand how to translate what I've just learned into action. I'll give you a simple example. One of the organizations that I worked in, there was a lot of focus of like, you know, how do we eliminate bias to help improve diversity, right? And there's a lot of conversation, a lot of, you know, events and panels, and I sat on so many of them as well. And at the end of the day, it was a good conversation, right? But everyone walked away inspired. But then there wasn't anything, okay, now what do I do differently? I feel good. I feel like I learned, but what am I doing? And so what this organization did, which was really cool, was spent like a lot of time focusing on, all right, we've done a lot of the what. We know what are the issues. Let's double down and help people understand, teach them how, right? So bias is okay, we all have them. We now understand all the different kind of biases that exist. Like how do you move from having that self-awareness to now regulating yourself so that you're not tripping up over with your own biases? But again, this is one of those things that it's not something that is close to being finished. We're still having the conversation.
A lot of work.
Right, it's a lot of work. And I think this is where continuing the conversation, amplifying the voices, driving awareness, holding people accountable, those are all things that we, people with your platform, my platform, all of us should be continuing to, you know,
100%.
amplify.
Yeah, because you know, a lot of your employees are not stupid and they see what you're doing. And, like I said, the people that you're putting in place and the younger generation
Yeah.
is not going to tolerate that.
Yeah. And if I may add one thing,
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
it's about walking the talk.
Yes.
Walking the talk,
Walking
right?
the talk.
And it's like great to have policies, it's great to have missions
Yes.
and vision statements, but you sit around the leadership tables and you see there's homogeneity of a certain type.
Yes.
You're like, well, then I think it's just not effective, right? And one of the things that I've loved coming to the organization that I'm in right now is today's not a it's a work from home day, so you don't see, but the amount of diversity that you see, not just at the working level, but also the leadership level, it's inspiring,
Nice.
right? That's when you know the intent is in the right place and it's now being trickled forward.
Nice. Awesome. So the second part of that you talked about is empathy. So I couldn't agree with you more, and that's something that's lacking in a lot of places because, like you said, we're all struggling with something. And we come to work and there's a lot of leaders or managers, whatever you want to call them, that really don't care or don't even ask how you're doing. And that's not a good feeling because at the end of the day, we're all humans. We're all, emotional beings, as I like to call it, right? So it's very important that empathy piece is super important. Now, this is a question I've actually raised on my social platforms is how do you train for empathy? How do you train leaders to have empathy?
Yeah, that's it's interesting, right? Because everyone's got so much going on. Everyone's got a million and one problems, right?
That's right.
And then it's like it's hard to cut through that noise and make space for someone else's.
That's right.
Right? And I've got a couple of points over here. I think the first one is if you're in a leadership position, right, you need to understand what the responsibilities are that come from it, right? And oftentimes people kind of, especially first-time leaders, might think it's a lot of managing the resources, getting productivity out, getting the outputs. And the reality is, and they learned that over time, it couldn't be further from the truth.
That's right.
Right? It is about multiplying value, yes, but how you go about it can make or break whether you are meant to be a leader or not. And in my experiences, I found that the leaders that have that servant leadership mentality,
Yes.
that I'm here to take care of you, right? You and all of you, in whatever aspect that looks like, those are the ones that are able to, have amazing teams that are engaged and that will go above and beyond.
That's right.
And the thing about those leaders that have that servant leader approach is they lead with empathy. And so, some of the best leaders that I've seen, one of the things that I've always observed about them, the commonality, I was like, what is so common about them? Is they have radical curiosity about their people.
Yes.
Right? Like they understand they're there to take care of them, and how to do it is to be radically curious about your people and to suspend judgment.
Yes.
Right? To suspend any of that internal noise and whatnot, but to really be curious, to understand the person, Rob, as you are, and what your needs are. And there's a saying, we have two ears and one mouth, listen more than you speak, right? To be able to be present, focused, and curious about that person. And when you're able to do that, which is easier to say than do, mind you, because all of us have all this going on in our heads, but to be mindful in the moment present and really hear and see what your people's needs are, that leads to you behaving in an empathetic way because you get the insights that you need to understand how you need to show up.
That's right.
For your talent, right? So that would be my 2 cents on empathy.
And be intentional with it.
Yeah. Right? The intent isn't to, and this is the thing, right? Intentionality can swing the dial on how you show up.
Yes.
Right? So if you're tick the box, I was told I need to be an empathetic leader, and therefore I'm going to be mindful and I'm going to listen to you and I'm going to be focused and pay attention. it's going to show as that, right? Because how you think is how you feel is how you act, and it comes out, right? Evolution has wired us to be able to detect authenticity, right? And the lack of as well. But if you come at it, if you are able to wire your internal compass to come from a place of care.
Yes.
I'm a leader. You've been put in my care. My responsibility is to care for you, right? Your intent gets wired the right way, and the actions that follow would lead to good things.
Absolutely. And my philosophy has always been lead with kindness and love.
Love it. Right? I'm all about that. All about that. In the world where you can be so many things, always choose kindness, right? Always choose kindness.
You can't go wrong.
You cannot go wrong. And I also want to caveat, like, kindness doesn't necessarily mean sugarcoat things or try to protect people from something that you think or perceive might hurt them. It also means, like, sometimes being transparent.
Absolutely.
And coming from a place of care, because that will make all the difference.
Yes. And have the boundaries as well.
Tell me more about that. I feel like
you have to have those boundaries in place. Like, again, being kind, you don't want to be perceived as, people can take advantage of you, of your kindness. So as a leader, you got to have those boundaries in place.
100%. 100%.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I want to talk to you about, or ask you, what is the best career advice or advice in general you've received in your life, and what's the worst advice you've ever received?
Oh, wow. Best one. Could I do more than one?
You can do more than one.
I can do more than one? Okay.
Yes.
I feel like the best one that I hold near and dear to this day is the first one would be relationships. They're everything, right? They're everything. If you're in a business or in a corporate environment and you're working with people, the relationships will determine how far you're going to go.
100%.
Right? And what big of an impact you're going to make. Forget about the distance. What's your impact going to be? Yep. And early in my career, I was mentored to, like, make the relationships before you need them. And then later on, I did my own addendum on intentionality. Why do I care about these relationships, right? Yeah. Like, you can come at it with an intent of, well, okay, if I do these relationships, tick, 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 I'm going to go far. No, right? You have to have the right intentionality and attitude about it, which is second advice that I got. And if you come from it from, like, a place, for me, it's like, how do I help? How do I help others, right? And if you come from that lens, you show up in a way which builds real relationships, right?
That's right.
Like, where value is being created for everybody. It's not a one-sided affair anymore. And so I would say relationships are super key, super fundamental. Anyone who's at any point in their careers, make sure you've got great relationships 360, right? And if it's not working out, learn how to either let go or learn how to address it.
Yes.
Right? Because oftentimes we tend to get in our heads and think that, it's their fault or I did everything right. But, like, showing up with, I'm going to give a 1-part B tip as well of career advice. And this comes from the previous organization I used to work in, which is, like, when it's moments of conflict, showing up with that 50-50 mindset.
Yes.
Right? Like, you know what, I'm going to be open-minded and I'm going to come in to seek what really happened, and I'm ready to take accountability for my part, right?
That's right.
And so when you come to the table like that, you walk out with co-finding the truth, right? Versus defending your turf.
Absolutely.
Right? And that's how relationships get stronger, richer, and deeper. And then the second piece of advice was attitude before altitude, right?
Yes.
Understand how you're showing up and make sure that you're doing the work that you need to do on you before, you continue progressing on your journey.
That's right.
Right?
Yes.
That was huge. That was profound. And I keep, like, reflecting on those ones. And the worst advice I was ever given. So I don't know if I covered this, but at one point in my career, I actually stepped out of career. You know, I became a mom. It was a big milestone for me. And unbeknownst to me, I wanted to become a full-time mom.
Nice.
Right? And one of the advice I was given at that time was don't do it. It'll impact your career. It'll be hard to get back on. You'll be set back. Your peers will. All of that came out of the woodwork. And I heard it. I didn't act on it. I went ahead and did my sabbatical, and it was really one of the best things that happened, right? Took a couple of years off, was a full-time mom, came back 3 years later, was an executive at a Big Five, right? So all that to say that taught me that whole concept of career is a marathon.
That's right.
It's not a sprint, right?
Absolutely.
And that life, we're all going to go through different stages. And at some point, you're going to put the foot hard on the pedal, and sometimes you're going to release that foot. And just know that every decision you're going to make, there's going to be a trade-off.
That's right.
And you just have to be okay with it, right?
Yes, absolutely. Awesome. So before we wrap this podcast, we've reached the segment of what I call rapid fire questions.
Oh, dear.
So I'm going to ask you some questions, and you tell me what's the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay, all right.
Right? So what does paying it forward mean to you, and how do you pay it forward?
Helping others, right? Like throughout my career, there have always been people that have helped me and lifted me along, right? And growing up, it was all about how do you, like the word that I used to be told, like, because you existed, someone else was able to exist better.
That's right.
Right? And so there's different ways that I go about it. Like I do a lot of mentorship through nonprofits, outside of nonprofits, some that we've actually connected on as well through Education Bank. And I'm fortunate to work at an organization that truly believes in giving back. It's part of their DNA. And this is the whole piece of, find a place where your North Star and their North Star align. So there's a lot of activities that we do as part of Jarvis in terms of giving back to the community, hosting events for women in technology, empowering them. There's a lot of blood bank donations that go out. I recently did a food prep at a shelter out in downtown. So it's just great. Like, I think that the more you give, the more you get.
Absolutely. I love that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
What's your key advice to young leaders?
My key advice to young leaders is be curious, be kind. Right? Be curious, be kind.
Awesome. What's the best word to describe Amna?
Oh, gosh. 3-part, work in progress.
Excellent. What is your unconventional definition of leadership?
Unconventional definition of leadership. It's weird. It's like a little bit like parenting to me, right? Mm-hmm. To me, it's like as a parent, a mom of 2 amazing, wonderful children, you want to grow these people to become the best possible versions that they can ever be.
That's right.
But it's understanding how much do you play a role in that and how much can you prescribe that versus how much do you guide. And I find like leadership when done right is like parenting when done right, right? Yep. You amplify what you have.
That's right. You're developing other leaders, right? Mm-hmm. Excellent. And what is the most difficult emotion to control as a leader?
The most difficult emotion, I would say, is, like in my experience, as a leader, people are always watching you and taking your cues from you, right? And if a leader's having a great day, it's like, oh, everything's gonna be great. Like, it's kind of like, even if you go back to yourself as a child, you would look to your parents and you're like, oh, this looks like we're in a sticky situation, but parents seem to be okay. We're okay, right? That's so right. Leadership, I think some of the difficult ones is realizing that leaders at the end of the day are still humans. Like, we do the same thing as people that are in any space and place, right? We eat breakfast, we go to the washroom, we put our pants on 1 foot at a time, and we have good days and we also have not so great days, right? And I think that for me, the eternal optimist glass half full, for me, I always subscribe to know, like, even when I'm having a bad day, I need to always show up for my team.
Yes.
Right? So early on in my leadership journey, to me, that was like, I need to show up like rah rah as a cheerleader. And then it was only after a certain time I realized, you know what? It's okay to be authentic and to be real, right?
Yes.
And tell your team, today I'm at 30%, guys. I'm gonna try to help you where I can, but it's been a rough week. Could be at home, could be at work, could be whatever. And I think there's something that does to create that psychological safety.
Yes.
To make people realize that you're a human just like them.
Exactly.
And gets them to just be.
Yep.
Right? And
Connect with you.
And to connect with you as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And last thing, where can people find Amna?
Oh, where can people find Amna? Okay. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm arguably probably the only person in the world with the name Amna Tariq-Buchholz. So I think if you can find me on LinkedIn, add me on. Happy to have a conversation with like-minded people and see how we can continue to pay it forward.
Awesome. Well, I wanted to thank you again for taking time to be with us today and sharing your valuable experience and knowledge and your great stories. Thank you so much. And for all those listening out there, thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next podcast. Take care, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks so much,
Thank
bro.
you.
Thank you.